Welcome to the Craftsman Online Podcast, the only 5-star rated Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. Any opinions, thoughts, or viewpoints shared during this program are that of the individual and do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, appendant, or concordant body from which that member may hail. I'm your host, Brother Michael Arce, co-founder of CraftsmanOnline.com, and you've joined us for an episode on a very special reenactment that'll be taking place a little bit later this month. On Sunday, April 30th, the Grand Lodge of New York will be performing a reenactment of George Washington's presidential inauguration. We're happy to have on our guest, as our special guest this week, Right Worshipful Scott Nagel, who is going to be sharing more details on this Masonic event. Welcome to the Craftsman Online Podcast, Brother Scott.
Oh, glad to be here, Brother Michael.
Let's start with what's probably going to be one of the most frequently asked questions you have for this event. Is it open to the public?
Well, I would say, of course, yes, it is. We usually perform the reenactment at Federal Hall when possible. Federal Hall is closed on Sundays, however, and April 30th this year falls on a Sunday. And the whole point of the reenactment is to share the spirit and pride we take as Freemasons in the esteem that President Washington held a fraternity. This year, we're doing it at Grand Lodge Building on 23rd Street.
Now, you said this year, so it would sound like this is something that the Lodge has done before?
Well, I've been involved in this event for about a dozen years. It's, as far as I know, it's been performed either at St. Paul's Church or Federal Hall for the last 20 years. And always, when possible, on April 30th.
So there's a lot of history around George Washington, especially on his influence in New York City, in New York, America, but also in Freemasonry. And a lot of that can be traced back to his time traveling throughout the colony when New York was a colony then during the Revolutionary War battles, and his time that he also spent as the nation's first president when New York City was the U.S. capital when the Constitution was first ratified. I think a lot of questions that folks that maybe aren't in the fraternity or just brothers that are listening would be like, why are Freemasons performing this event and why are they doing it in the state of New York?
Well, the event is a uniquely New York experience. It was held in the nation's first capital in the first building designated for the new republic. President Washington was sworn in on a Bible supplied by St. John's Lodge Number 1, whose meeting hall was nearby. The Bible is still in the custody of St. John's Lodge and on display at Federal Hall here in New York. Washington was also an honorary member of Holland Lodge Number 8, a New York lodge. We even have a room at Masonic Hall dedicated to him, including a life-size golden statue and 2 lodges in the state chartered in his name.
This is most likely going to be a very meaningful and memorable event that's hosted by brothers from throughout the Grand Lodge, the state of New York. I know we're going to have some dignitaries there from our own Grand Master and Most Worshipful Richard Kessler, members of the Grand Line. Who are the brothers that are actually going to be performing this? Are they from one lodge or is it a group of Freemasons?
It's not a particular group of people. We do have recurring players every year when possible. One of the committee members is performing in this role. Usually we have a rotating cast, members from other jurisdictions. Our favorite player in years past was Brother Mark Wright from Oklahoma, who spends time in DC and then travels on occasion to New York to perform this just for us. Special occasion when he shows up.
And is the reenactment that we witness, is it what most of us would see when the inauguration happens, the swearing in, or are there speeches or other moments that are captured during the performance?
Well, the actual event was a whole day-long affair. It started as a procession from where Washington was staying in New Jersey at about 10 a.m. At noon, there was a luncheon and a reception. The actual swearing in after speeches and all sorts of presentations occurred at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We do our reenactment at noon because it was scheduled to happen. Excuse me, it was scheduled to happen at noon. but we don't want to drag out a 4-hour event. So the whole thing takes about 45 minutes. We do have a master of ceremonies who kind of gives an idea, a setting for the attendees, and then a short section of the president's speech at that point.
What's neat about this is that a lot of our Masonic ritual or ceremonies, they're closed to non-members, basically to protect the secrets of Freemasonry, the craft. I'm imagining that you had almost an endless supply of source material for this reenactment. Can you tell us a little bit about the committee? Is it mainly historians or just general folks who are huge fans of George Washington?
Yeah, we're pretty much just fans. I would say, again, referencing Brother Mark Wright as an individual who's a huge chest of knowledge about George Washington. The rest of us, we just approach this as our fun day for the year. Although we come as close as we can to the original event. The source material comes from the Congressional Record, the Library of Congress, and actual news accounts of the day.
I would love, is part of the story of what is now known as the Washington Bible, St. John's Lodge Bible, is that kind of weaved into the fabric of this story?
Oh, very much so. When the ceremony was about to take place, the usual way of swearing in a judge at that time, or any official, was to have their hand on a Bible, and nobody had thought to brought a Bible for this procedure. And of course, some of the pomp and circumstance was made up on site, and it was decided that they wanted a Bible. The master of St. John's Lodge number 1 raised his hand and said, "Well, I have a Bible handy." He ran back to the lodge room, grabbed the Bible, and brought it for George Washington to take his oath on. And that Bible has become a national treasure. And of course, as I mentioned before, St. John's Lodge still owns and maintains it. For the ceremony that we use at the actual event today, we use a replica that's also supplied by St. John's Lodge. And a replica, when I say that, down to looking like a 265-year-old Bible.
Wow. And there's so much history. And this is one of the things that drew me to Freemasonry personally, was the George Washington connection. I think every American can say, obviously, he is probably the most famous president and citizen of our country, as going all the way back to being the founding father and such a great leader. And then when you find out, oh, he was also a Freemason, if that's how you find out about George Washington and make that Masonic connection, it just really amplifies, I think, the legend around him. And when you find out the neat things that he did as a Freemason in New York City, and having lived in upstate New York and getting to go down to New York City for our Grand Lodge sessions, I would always try to make time to go to those special places. I'm trying to remember the bar or now it's a restaurant, the tavern, where he said farewell to the troops and had that really touching dinner.
The touching dinner. Funny you say that. It was Francis Tavern, and the room where that celebration took place is maintained in the same condition as it was then. One of the interesting details about that retirement party, as it was billed, was the bar tab for the day. Well, it was more like 2 days. It came to about $17,000 in those dollars. And today's dollars would be, I don't know, $100,000 that he spent. So it was a party.
Yeah. Well, that and the moving speech, it was like one of the first times that it was recorded. And I think that was also unique about the time, was that they were very protective, or Washington was very protective, and he shared emotion and showed emotion to the troops. And that was the touching part, like hearing that element of the story. And then the other fascinating part is, as you mentioned, getting to go to our Grand Lodge building in Manhattan and spending time and seeing that gigantic George Washington statue and seeing the special areas that they have set up for him. And that really helps make that connection to to George Washington and Freemasonry. Is that available for people to attend? Do you have kind of tours or a guided tour of some of those rooms?
Absolutely. Tours are available on request, although there's usually somebody available spontaneously to tour the building. The rooms are spectacular. They were just redone about 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago, and each of the lodge rooms in the building are based on a theme from a different period of history. The Colonial room where this reenactment is taking place, dedicated to the kind of appearance that a colonial era Masonic hall would have had. There's the French Ionic room decorated in arts similar to what you might have seen in France at the time, and many other areas of the building. And of course, that room with George Washington statue, which is the Hollander room. There's also Holland Lodge, which has their own little supper room, their own little club room in the building. I don't know if the tour would go there every day, but you can ask to see that room, which has among its George Washington artifacts an apron supposedly given to him by the Marquis de Lafayette, who was a huge aide in the Revolutionary War. That room also has plaques dedicated to past masters of Holland Lodge, including two other past presidents, both Roosevelts.
Right Worshipful Scott Nagel is our special guest this week on the Craftsman Online podcast. We're talking about an event that'll be taking place on Sunday, April 30th. If you're near the Grand Lodge of New York, we highly encourage you to attend. At Masonic Hall on 23rd Street in New York City, they'll be doing a reenactment of President George Washington's inaugural address, and it'll be a 45-minute ceremony. It will also be viewed by our Grand Master, Most Worshipful Richard Kessler, and members of the New York Grand Line will also be in attendance. Brother Scott, is there a moment from this ceremony that you are specifically looking forward to?
Well, everybody enjoys the procession that kind of recreates the environment that was George Washington walking up to the podium to take his oath. And that involves a fife and drum corps and color guard from various Masonic groups in New York State. And towards the end of the event, our Master of Ceremony has coached the audience when George Washington finally takes his oath. The audience shouts, "Huzzah!" much the way it would have been done 260 years ago.
And any event that has audience participation, I love that. That's a great idea. We know that George Washington's career in Freemasonry officially started on November 4th, 1752, when he was initiated as an entered apprentice in Virginia. But actually, there's some pretty unique New York connections as well. In March of 1789, as you mentioned, Holland Lodge was the first to be chartered under the newly independent Grand Lodge of New York, and they offered now Brother Washington full membership without the need for an application. He did not have to pay annual dues. There's also some great stories of just the time when he was General Washington and still Brother Washington, and the acts of courage and brotherhood and fraternity that he provided to our troops during the Revolutionary War in Saratoga. I know, at least where I'm familiar with in upstate New York, you hear a lot of that. Are there any examples that you like to share when people walk up and ask you why George Washington is so important or held in high prominence when it comes to Freemasonry here in America?
He was a huge celebrity, as you said, in his day, and everybody wanted to meet him. Churches clamored for his appearances, and every organization that he belonged to, not just Masons, really wanted to honor him and make him part of their special needs as a group. Freemasonry was attractive in both ways. George Washington really liked the idea, what we call the tenets of Freemasonry, the principles that we engender as brothers, and our etiquette and the way we approach society. It's something that when he was a young man, he was, I don't remember the name of the booklet, but it was a book on etiquette and proper public attitude. And it was something so similar to what we do as Freemasons that he was attracted to us. And of course, his career and the stories of his career attracted Freemasonry to him. He exemplified the ideals that we hold dear.
I love the example that you led with there. I read the rules of etiquette, and it's funny because some folks think that Washington wrote the book, which he didn't. He was given it to him as a young child going through school, and he just read it so many times that it kind of became associated with him, especially after, he became the George Washington that we all know and love. And the book is interesting. Some of the rules would make complete and total sense, and you kind of wish that etiquette still existed, at least in the form of the actions that gentlemen provide in their everyday life. But some of them are kind of outdated, like don't spit into the campfire. We don't spend too much time around those there these days. But I think, as you were saying, Brother Scott, like one of the things that I've always liked about Washington is not so much the words that he used, but he did speak nobly. But he was a great example of kind of what we learn in Freemasonry, the concept of that actions speak louder than words. And when you put those into the light as we have and as Freemasons and can look to see how he was standing and what he would say to people and just how he would treat others, you can definitely say, yes, that's a perfect example of Freemasonry. To everyone else, he would just seem like a nice, noble gentleman, I think.
Well, that's where we take pride in his attachment to the fraternity.
So the cool thing about this event, and we're going to include all the details, it's happening Sunday, April 30th, Masonic Hall, which is on 23rd Street in New York City. You're going to get the time that everything will take place, how to RSVP. That's all going to be in the show notes. So look for those details for this episode. And of course, Craftsman Online, we are so proud to partner with the Grand Lodge of New York and spread the word about this event. I'd like to, have you help brothers in our wider audience. I know all around New York State and into the other places where our listeners are from across the country and all the other jurisdictions, there's lodges that either have unique history or have a fantastic story to tell that would be a great way of not just sharing that history with brothers, but also as a real community outreach event for Freemasonry. What advice do you have, having worked on this committee to put together this fantastic event? What tips can you share to those listening if they would want to try to do something like this in their lodge?
Number one, if you're going to involve the Grand Line, you must work closely with the Grand Marshal and contact him way in advance. This will give you an insight into what they expect from you and also help you get all the peripheral things in place. And as I said, start way in advance. As Brother Bobby Burns liked to say, best laid plans of mice and men gang after glay.
Great advice. It's funny that that's the advice, and I'm sorry to laugh, but it's true. I know with so many of it, it's like, hey, did you know in 2 months this thing is taking place? And it's like, no, if you really want to have a quality event and bring in a lot of people, really a year out would probably be a safe bet. The one thing that we didn't cover, and before I let you go, I guess this will be our final question. For those attending the event on Sunday, April 30th, are you in it? And what part or what character should we be looking for?
Well, no, I don't play a part, but there are 5 players, and they'll all be dressed in period costume. But really, you should be paying attention to the words. Our Right Worshipful Sam Kinsey is our master of ceremonies, and he will make the event special, all on his own, even without the players. So it's something to pay attention to.
Well, this has been the Craftsman Online podcast. Again, a big thanks to our guests for coming on this week. Right Worshipful Scott Nagel, best of luck with the event on Sunday, April 30th. I wish I could be at Masonic Hall for that one.
Well, you watch the broadcast. And thank you very much, Michael.
If you've enjoyed this episode and you want to hear more, you can just tell Siri or Alexa to play the Craftsman Online podcast. We're available on all streaming platforms with new episodes every Monday morning. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.